The morning sun was just coming up over the hills when 72-year-old Harold Jenkins saw something that made his heart pound. A woman in a blue blazer was walking through his vineyard with a clipboard. She was snapping pictures of his grapevines. She was writing things down, and she was pulling off the little tags he had tied to each plant. Harold stood on his porch, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. He watched as this stranger, someone he had never seen before in his entire life, reached out and actually cut one of his grapevines with a pair of garden shears. She cut his vine. The vine he had planted with his own 2 hands. The vine his late wife Margaret had helped him tie to the wooden post just 3 years ago, before the cancer took her away. Harold felt something hot rise up in his chest. It was anger, but it was also something else. It was the feeling of being invaded, of having something precious destroyed right in front of his eyes. He set down his coffee cup. His hands were shaking a little bit, not from age, but from the pure shock of what he was seeing. The woman in the blue blazer looked up and saw him watching, and do you know what she did? She smiled. She actually smiled at him like she belonged there. Like she had every right in the world to be standing in his vineyard, cutting his plants, and taking pictures of his property. Then she started walking toward his house, her high heels sinking into the soft dirt between the vine rows. She was holding out a piece of paper like it was some kind of official document. Harold's jaw tightened. He had lived on this land for 47 years. He had bought it long before any fancy neighborhood with swimming pools and tennis courts existed anywhere nearby. He had never signed any papers. He had never agreed to any rules, and he certainly had never given anyone permission to step foot on his property, let alone destroy his beloved grapevines. But what happened next? What did that piece of paper say? And what did Harold do when he found out the truth about why this woman thought she could march onto his land and start making demands? Well, let me tell you, what Harold Jenkins did changed everything. Not just for him, but for an entire neighborhood full of people who had been bullied and pushed around for far too long. And by the end of this story, that woman in the blue blazer would wish she had never even heard the name Harold Jenkins. Before I continue, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you are enjoying this story, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what happens next. Trust me, you will want to see how this unfolds. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you how a quiet, kind old man who just wanted to grow grapes and live in peace ended up in the middle of the biggest battle his little corner of the world had ever seen. Harold Jenkins was not the kind of man who looked for trouble. In fact, he spent most of his life trying to avoid it. He was born in a small town in Virginia, the son of a farmer and a school teacher. His daddy taught him how to work the land, how to respect the soil, and how to be patient. His mama taught him how to read, how to be kind, and how to always treat people the way you want to be treated. When Harold was 25 years old, he married the love of his life. A woman named Margaret, with sparkling brown eyes and a laugh that could make flowers bloom. At least, that is what Harold always said. They moved to a piece of land just outside of what is now called Riverside County. Back then, there was nothing out there but fields and trees and the occasional deer wandering through. Harold and Margaret built their house with their own hands. It took them 2 whole summers, working every evening after Harold got home from his job at the local hardware store. Margaret would bring him lemonade and sandwiches, and they would sit on the half-finished porch and watch the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. They could not have children. The doctors never could explain why, and it was the one sadness that hung over their otherwise happy life, like a small gray cloud. But Harold and Margaret decided that they would not let that sadness define them. Instead, they poured all the love they would have given to children into their land, their home, and each other. When Harold turned 50, he retired from the hardware store. He had saved enough money to live simply, and he had a dream. He wanted to grow grapes, not to make wine or to sell them, but just because he thought they were beautiful. He loved the way the vines curled around the wooden posts. He loved the way the leaves turned golden in the fall, and he loved the way the grapes hung in perfect little bunches, like nature's own jewelry. Margaret supported his dream, just like she supported everything he ever wanted to do. Together, they planted the first row of grapevines on a spring morning, when the birds were singing, and the world felt brand new. Over the next 20 years, Harold's vineyard grew. It was not a big vineyard, maybe 3 acres at most. But it was perfect to him. Every single vine had a name. He named them after people he admired, places he had visited, and books he had read. There was a vine named Hemingway, and one named Paris. There was a vine named Hope, and one named Joy. And there was a vine named Margaret. He planted that one the day after his wife passed away, 3 years ago. He planted it right in the center of the vineyard, where the morning sun hit first. Every day since then, he would walk out to that vine and talk to it, just like he used to talk to Margaret over breakfast. He would tell it about his day, about the weather, about the birds he saw, and the dreams he had. That vine, the Margaret vine, was the one the woman in the blue blazer had cut, but Harold did not know that yet. Not at that moment when she was walking toward him with her clipboard and her fake smile. He would find out soon enough. And when he did, something inside him would break and then rebuild itself into something stronger than it had ever been before. For now, let me tell you about what had been happening in the area around Harold's little piece of paradise. About 15 years ago, A big development company bought up all the land surrounding Harold's property. They built fancy houses with 3-car garages and swimming pools in the backyard. They built a clubhouse with a gym and a room for parties. They planted palm trees along the streets and put in sidewalks that were always perfectly clean. They called it Riverside Estates, and they set up a homeowners association to keep everything running smoothly. The HOA had rules about everything: what color you could paint your house, how tall your grass could be, what kind of mailbox you were allowed to have, even what kind of flowers you could plant in your front yard. Most of the people who moved into Riverside Estates did not mind the rules. They liked that everything looked neat and tidy. They liked that their neighbors could not park old cars in their driveways or let their lawns turn brown. But some people did mind. Some people felt like the HOA had too much power. They felt like they were being watched all the time, like they could not do anything without someone showing up to tell them they were breaking a rule. The president of the HOA was a woman named Victoria Blackwell. She was 55 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair and fingernails that were always painted the exact same shade of red. She wore blue blazers to every meeting, and she carried a clipboard everywhere she went. Victoria took her job very seriously. Maybe too seriously. She believed that rules were the most important thing in the world. And she believed that her job was to make sure everyone followed them, no matter what. Over the years, Victoria had made a lot of people upset. She had fined a family $200 because their Christmas lights stayed up until January 15th instead of January 1st. She had sent angry letters to an old woman whose cat liked to sit on the front porch, claiming the cat was an eyesore. She had even threatened to put a lien on a young couple's house because they planted roses that were the wrong shade of pink. But Victoria always got away with it because most people did not want to fight. Most people just paid the fines and followed the rules, even when those rules seemed silly or mean. Victoria had one big problem, though. There was one piece of land right in the middle of her perfect neighborhood that she could not control. One little patch of property that did not belong to Riverside Estates. One stubborn holdout that made her beautiful community look, in her opinion, like a mess. That property belonged to Harold Jenkins. Harold's vineyard sat right at the entrance to Riverside Estates. Every single resident had to drive past it to get to their homes. And Victoria hated it. She hated the old wooden fence that surrounded it. She hated the hand-painted sign that said Jenkins Vineyard, in crooked letters. She hated the way the grapevines grew wild and free, instead of in the perfect, controlled patterns she preferred. Most of all, she hated that she could not do anything about it. You see, Harold's property had been there long before Riverside Estates existed. He had never signed any HOA agreement. He had never agreed to follow any of their rules. Legally, the HOA had absolutely no power over him. But Victoria did not care about what was legal. She cared about what she wanted. And what she wanted was for Harold's vineyard to disappear. For years, she had tried everything she could think of. She sent him letters demanding that he clean up his property. Harold threw them in the trash. She had her lawyer send him scary-looking documents. Harold's lawyer sent them back with a note that said, "Nice try." She even tried to get the county to condemn his land, claiming it was a health hazard. The county inspector came out, looked around, and told Victoria she was wasting everyone's time. Nothing worked. Harold just kept living his quiet life, tending his vines, and ignoring Victoria Blackwell completely. This made Victoria furious. She was not used to being ignored. She was not used to losing. And she was definitely not used to some old man in overalls making her look foolish. So Victoria came up with a new plan. A plan that was sneaky and mean and probably not entirely legal. A plan that she thought would finally give her the power to force Harold off his land. She decided to simply pretend that Harold's property was part of the HOA. She would document violations, issue fines, and create so much paperwork that Harold would have no choice but to either comply with her demands or spend all his money fighting her in court. It was a terrible plan, a cruel plan, the kind of plan that only works when you are dealing with someone who does not know their rights or does not have the strength to fight back. Victoria thought Harold was that kind of person. She thought he was just a lonely old man who would crumble under pressure. She could not have been more wrong. On the morning that changed everything, Victoria woke up early. She put on her best blue blazer. She grabbed her clipboard, her camera, and a pair of garden shears. She had decided that today was the day she would finally take control of Harold's property. She drove to his vineyard just as the sun was coming up. She parked her car on the road and walked through the gap in his old wooden fence. She told herself that she was just documenting violations. She told herself that she had every right to be there. But deep down, she knew the truth. She knew she was trespassing. She knew she had no authority. She knew that what she was doing was wrong. But she did not care. She was Victoria Blackwell, president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association, and she was used to getting her way. She walked through the vineyard, snapping pictures and writing notes on her clipboard. She pulled off the little name tags Harold had tied to each vine, stuffing them in her pocket like evidence of some crime. And then she saw a vine that was growing a little bit crooked, a vine that was leaning against its wooden post in a way that looked untidy. Victoria pulled out her garden shears and cut it. She did not know that vine was named Margaret. She did not know that it was planted in memory of the most important person in Harold's life. She did not know that cutting that vine was the worst thing she could possibly have done, but she was about to find out, because Harold had seen everything. And Harold was done being patient. Harold was done being kind. Harold was done letting people walk all over him. As Victoria walked toward his house with her clipboard and her fake smile, Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He was old, but he was not helpless. He knew how to use technology when he needed to, and right now, he needed to. He opened his camera app and started recording. Everything was about to change. Harold kept his phone steady as Victoria walked closer. His hands were not shaking anymore. Something cold and calm had settled over him, like a blanket of fresh snow. He had learned a long time ago that anger was most powerful when you kept it quiet, when you let it simmer instead of boil. Victoria stopped at the edge of his porch, her high heels now covered in dark vineyard dirt. She did not seem to notice or care. She was too busy putting on her official face, the one she used when she was about to tell someone they had broken a rule. "Good morning," she said, her voice sweet like honey that had gone bad. "Are you the property owner?" Harold did not answer right away. He just kept recording, making sure to get her face, her clipboard, and the garden shears, still clutched in her left hand. "I asked you a question," Victoria said, her smile starting to slip. "Are you the owner of this property?" "I am," Harold finally said. His voice was calm and steady. "And who might you be?" Victoria straightened her blazer and lifted her chin. "I am Victoria Blackwell, president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. I am here to inform you that your property is in violation of several community standards." She held out the piece of paper she had been carrying. Harold did not take it. "I see," Harold said. "And what violations would those be?" Victoria looked down at her clipboard and started reading. "Failure to maintain proper fencing, overgrown vegetation, unapproved agricultural structures, failure to submit landscaping plans for approval, and," she paused for effect, "failure to pay HOA dues for the past 15 years. Harold almost laughed. Almost. But he kept his face still. "That is very interesting," he said. "Tell me something, Mrs. Blackwell. When exactly did I join your HOA?" Victoria blinked. "Excuse me?" "I asked when I joined your homeowners association. Do you have the paperwork? The agreement I signed? The documents that say I agreed to follow your rules?" Victoria's smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "Well, your property is within the boundaries of our community, so naturally you are subject to our guidelines." "Is that so?" Harold nodded slowly. "And who decided those boundaries?" "The development company established them when Riverside Estates was built, 15 years ago." "That is correct." Harold took a step closer, still holding his phone up. "Mrs. Blackwell, I have lived on this land for 47 years. I bought it in 1978. I have the deed in my filing cabinet inside. Would you like to see it?" Victoria's face started to change color, just a little bit. A touch of pink appeared on her cheeks. "The boundaries are the boundaries," she said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "It does not matter when you bought the property. You are still required to comply." "No," Harold said. "I am not. I never signed any agreement. I never joined any association, and your development company does not get to decide that my land that has been in my name for almost 50 years, suddenly belongs to your little club." He took another step closer. "But I will tell you what you did do today, Mrs. Blackwell. You trespassed on private property. You took items that belonged to me, those name tags you stuffed in your pocket, and you destroyed my property when you cut that vine." Victoria's face went from pink to pale. "I was simply documenting violations. There are no violations because I am not part of your HOA. What there is, Mrs. Blackwell, is a crime. Several crimes, actually." Harold held up his phone so she could see the screen. "And I have it all recorded." Victoria stared at the phone like it was a snake about to bite her. For the first time since she had walked onto his property, she looked scared. "That recording is illegal," she said quickly. "You cannot record someone without their consent." "Actually," Harold said, "this state has one-party consent laws for recording. That means I only need my own permission to record, and I gave myself permission about 10 minutes ago, when I watched you cut my wife's memorial vine." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like a fish that had been pulled out of water. "Your wife's what?" "The vine you cut," Harold said. And now his voice did shake, just a little. "That vine was named Margaret. I planted it 3 years ago, right after my wife passed away. It was my way of keeping her close, and you walked onto my property and destroyed it." For just a moment, something flickered in Victoria's eyes. It might have been shame, it might have been guilt, but whatever it was, it disappeared quickly, replaced by the hard, defensive look of someone who knows they have done something wrong but refuses to admit it. "I had no way of knowing that," she said. "And regardless, the vine was not properly maintained. It was leaning against the post in an unsightly manner." Harold stared at her for a long moment. He had met many people, in his 72 years. He had met kind people and cruel people, generous people and selfish people. But he had never met anyone quite like Victoria Blackwell, someone so convinced of their own rightness that they could not see the harm they were causing, even when it was right in front of their face. "Mrs. Blackwell," Harold said, "I want you to leave my property now. And I want you to understand something very clearly. If you ever set foot on my land again, I will have you arrested for trespassing, and I will use this video To make sure everyone in your precious community knows exactly what kind of person their HOA president really is. Victoria's jaw tightened. She was not used to being spoken to this way. She was not used to being threatened, and she definitely was not used to losing. "This is not over," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "I will be speaking to our lawyers. You will be hearing from us very soon. I look forward to it," Harold said. "Now get off my land." Victoria turned and walked away, her high heels stabbing into the dirt with every step. She did not look back. She got into her fancy car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind her. Harold watched until she was gone. Then he lowered his phone and let out a long, slow breath. His hands were shaking again. But this time, it was not from anger. It was from something else entirely. It was from the realization that he had just started a war, and he had no idea how it was going to end. He walked down from the porch and made his way through the vineyard to the center, where the Margaret vine stood, or where it used to stand. Now there was just a stump, cut clean about 6 inches from the ground. Harold knelt down in the dirt, not caring that his knees would ache later. He reached out and touched the cut edge of the vine, feeling where the living wood had been sliced through. "I am sorry, Margaret," he whispered. "I should have protected you better." He stayed there for a long time, just kneeling in the dirt. Remembering the day they planted the first vines together. Remembering how Margaret would laugh when the birds came to steal the grapes. Remembering how she would hold his hand as they walked between the rows, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. He remembered the last day too. The day she slipped away, her hand in his, her eyes looking at something he could not see. She had smiled at the end. She had whispered something, but he had not been able to hear it. He had always wondered what she was trying to say. After a while, Harold stood up. His knees did ache, just like he knew they would. But he did not mind. Pain was part of life. Pain meant you were still living. He walked back to the house and went inside. He sat down at his kitchen table and looked at his phone. The video was still there, saved in his camera roll. Evidence of everything Victoria had done. He knew he should call the police. He knew he should call a lawyer. But something stopped him. Something made him hesitate. Because Harold Jenkins was, at his core, a kind man. He had spent his whole life trying to see the good in people, trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Even now, after everything Victoria had done, a part of him wondered if maybe she did not understand. Maybe she just needed someone to show her a better way. He thought about what Margaret would say. She always believed that people could change. She always believed that kindness could melt even the coldest heart. Harold put his phone down and looked out the window at his vineyard. The vines were swaying gently in the morning breeze, their leaves catching the sunlight and turning it into a dance of shadows and gold. Maybe, he thought, there was a better way to handle this. Maybe he did not have to fight fire with fire. Maybe he could fight fire with water instead, but first, he needed to know what he was dealing with. He needed to understand who Victoria Blackwell really was, and why she was so determined to take his land. He picked up his phone again, and started searching. It did not take long to find information about Riverside Estates and its HOA. There were news articles about the community, reviews on neighborhood websites, and even a few posts on social media where residents complained about the strict rules and unfair fines. The more Harold read, the more concerned he became. This was not just about him. This was about a whole community of people being bullied by someone who had too much power and not enough heart. He read about the family who had been fined for their Christmas lights. He read about the old woman with the cat. He read about the young couple with the roses. And he read about dozens of other incidents, each one smaller and meaner than the last. There was the man who had been told he could not fly an American flag in his front yard because it was not on the approved list of decorations. There was the woman who had been fined because her garbage cans were visible from the street for 10 minutes on trash day. There was the teenager who had been banned from using the community pool because his swimsuit had a logo on it that was not approved. Story after story, fine after fine, rule after rule. It painted a picture of a community living in fear. A community where no one felt free to just live their lives. And at the center of it all was Victoria Blackwell. Harold closed his phone and sat back in his chair. He thought about what it must be like to live in that neighborhood, to wake up every morning wondering if today was the day you would get another letter, another fine, another threat. It made him sad, and it made him angry. But mostly, it made him determined. He was not going to let Victoria win. Not because he wanted revenge, but because it was the right thing to do. Because somewhere in that neighborhood, there were good people who deserved to live without fear. Because somewhere in that neighborhood, there might be another old man like him. Someone who had lost someone they loved and just wanted to be left alone to remember. Harold stood up and walked to his filing cabinet. He pulled out the folder that contained all his property documents, the deed, the surveys, the tax records, everything he needed to prove that his land was his, and that no HOA had any power over it. He spread the documents out on his kitchen table and started organizing them. If Victoria wanted a fight, he would give her one, but it would be a fair fight, a legal fight, the kind of fight where the truth mattered. He was so focused on his work that he almost did not hear the knock on his door. Harold looked up, his heart jumping a little. Had Victoria come back? Was she going to try again? He walked to the door and opened it carefully, ready for anything. But it was not Victoria standing on his porch. It was someone else entirely. It was a young woman, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that looked like they had seen too much worry. She was holding a little boy's hand. The boy was about 5 or 6, with the same dark hair and the same tired eyes. "Mr. Jenkins," the woman said. "My name is Maria Santos. I live in Riverside Estates, and I saw what happened this morning. I watched from my window when that woman came onto your property." Harold looked at her, then at the little boy, then back at her. "And," he said. Maria took a deep breath. "And I want to help you. Because that woman has made my life miserable for 3 years, and I am done being afraid." Harold studied her face for a long moment. He saw fear there, but he also saw something else. He saw courage. He saw hope. He saw the kind of determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Maria smiled, just a little. She picked up her son and carried him inside, and that was the moment when everything started to change. That was the moment when Harold Jenkins stopped being a man fighting alone and started becoming something much more powerful. He started becoming a leader, but neither Harold nor Maria knew that someone was watching them. Someone who had followed Maria from her house in Riverside Estates. Someone who was sitting in a car parked down the road, taking pictures and writing notes. Victoria Blackwell had not given up. She had only just begun, and what she was planning next would shake Harold's world to its very foundation. Maria sat at Harold's kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. Her son, a quiet boy named Diego, was sitting on the floor playing with some old wooden blocks that Harold had found in a closet. They had belonged to his nephew, who was now a grown man with children of his own. "It started 3 years ago," Maria said, her voice soft but steady. "Right after my husband left. He just disappeared one day, took all the money from our bank account and drove away. I never saw him again." Harold listened without interrupting. He had learned a long time ago that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was simply let them talk. "I thought I could make it work," Maria continued. "I had a good job at a dental office. The house was almost paid off. Diego was just a baby, so he did not understand what was happening. I thought we would be okay." She paused and took a sip of her cold tea, making a face at the temperature but not complaining. Then the letters started coming. From the HOA. They said my lawn was too long. They said my mailbox was the wrong color. They said the curtains in my front window were not on the approved list of window treatments. Harold shook his head slowly. "Window treatments?" "Harold, I know," Maria said with a sad little laugh. "I did not even know that was a thing. But Victoria Blackwell made sure I knew. She sent me a fine for $50. I paid it because I did not want any trouble. But then more letters came, more fines, more rules I did not know existed." She set down her teacup and looked directly at Harold. "In 3 years, I have paid over $4,000 in fines to the HOA. $4,000 that should have gone to Diego's future. $4,000 that I did not have." Harold felt his chest tighten. $4,000 was a lot of money to anyone, but to a single mother struggling to make ends meet, it might as well have been $1 million. "Why did you keep paying?" he asked gently. "Did you know that some of those fines might not have been legal?" Maria shook her head. "I did not know anything. I just knew that the letters kept threatening to put a lien on my house. They said if I did not pay, they would take my home, and I could not let that happen. This house is all Diego has. It is all I have." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. Harold could tell she was not the kind of person who liked to cry in front of strangers. "I tried to fight back once," she said. "About a year ago, I went to an HOA meeting and asked why the fines were so high. I asked why the rules were so strict. Do you know what Victoria said to me?" Harold shook his head. "She said that if I did not like the rules, I could sell my house and move somewhere else. She said that Riverside Estates had standards, and if I could not meet those standards, then maybe I did not belong there." Maria's voice cracked on the last words. On the floor, Diego looked up from his blocks, his little face worried. Maria quickly smiled at him, and he went back to playing. "After that meeting," Maria whispered, "the fines got worse. It was like Victoria was punishing me for speaking up. She found violations I did not even know were possible. She said my welcome mat was too worn. She said my wind chimes were too loud. She said the color of my front door had faded, and was no longer the approved shade of blue." Harold reached across the table and put his hand on top of Maria's. His skin was wrinkled and spotted with age, but his grip was warm and strong. "You are not alone anymore," he said. "I promise you that." Maria looked at him with surprise. "But Mr. Jenkins, you do not even know me. Why would you help?" Harold thought about that question for a moment. He thought about Margaret and how she had always helped people without asking for anything in return. He thought about his father, who used to say that a man's worth was measured not by what he had, but by what he gave. "Because it is the right thing to do," Harold finally said. "And because someone has to stand up to people like Victoria Blackwell. Bullies only win when good people stay quiet." Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I do not know how to stand up to her. Every time I try, she just makes things worse." "Then we will figure it out together," Harold said. "But first, I need to know everything. I need to know who else Victoria has hurt. I need to know how she operates. and I need to know if there is anyone inside that HOA who might be willing to help us. Maria nodded slowly. There are others. Lots of others. Most of them are too scared to say anything. But there is one woman, Mrs. Chen, who lives at the end of my street. She has been fighting Victoria for years. She might be willing to talk to you. Harold felt a small spark of hope light up in his chest. One ally was good, two was better, and maybe, if they were lucky, there would be more. Can you introduce me to her? He asked. I can try. But Mr. Jenkins, you need to understand something. Victoria has eyes everywhere. She has people in the neighborhood who report to her. They watch everything. They tell her everything. If she finds out we are working together, she will come after both of us. Harold smiled, and there was a hint of steel in his old eyes. Let her come. I have been waiting for a good reason to fight for something again. Maria looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled too. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, but it was real. My husband used to say that some people are born fighters, she said. He was wrong about a lot of things, but I think he would have been right about you. Harold chuckled softly. I am not a fighter, Maria. I am just a stubborn old man who does not like being pushed around. There is a difference. Maria shook her head. No. I have met stubborn people before. This is something different. You have fire in you, Mr. Jenkins. I can see it. Before Harold could respond, Diego stood up from his blocks and walked over to the table. He tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed at Harold. Mama, he said in a tiny voice. Is this man going to help us? Maria looked at her son, then at Harold, then back at her son. I think so, baby. I think he is going to try. Diego studied Harold with serious eyes that seemed too old for his young face. Then he walked around the table and held out his small hand. Thank you, he said solemnly. My mama cries a lot. I do not like it when she cries. Harold felt something crack open inside his chest. He took the boy's tiny hand in his own and shook it gently. I do not like it when mamas cry either, he said. So let us see what we can do about that. Diego nodded once, satisfied, and went back to his blocks. Maria watched him go with tears streaming down her face, not even trying to hide them anymore. He is a good boy, Harold said softly. He is everything, Maria replied. He is the only reason I keep fighting. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Diego build a tower with the old wooden blocks. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, filling the kitchen with warm golden light. It felt peaceful, despite everything. Then Harold's phone buzzed on the table, making them both jump. He picked it up and looked at the screen. It was an email notification, and the subject line made his blood run cold. Official notice of violation, property at 4521, Old Mill Road. Immediate action required. Harold opened the email and read it quickly, his jaw tightening with every word. What is it? Maria asked, her voice worried. Harold turned the phone so she could see the screen. Victoria is not wasting any time. She has sent me an official violation notice. According to this, I have 30 days to bring my property into compliance with HOA standards, or face legal action. Maria's face went pale. But you are not part of the HOA. She cannot do that. No, she cannot, Harold agreed. But she is doing it anyway. She is betting that I will not know the difference. She is betting that I will be too scared or too tired to fight back. He set the phone down and looked out the window at his vineyard. The vines were still swaying in the breeze, peaceful and unaware of the storm that was gathering around them. She made a mistake, Harold said quietly. A big one. What do you mean? Harold turned back to Maria with a look in his eyes that she had not seen before. It was the look of a man who had found his purpose. She put it in writing, he said. She sent an official document claiming authority over my property. That is not just harassment anymore, Maria. That might be fraud. And fraud is a crime. Maria's eyes went wide. Do you think the police would actually do something? Maybe, maybe not, but I know someone who will definitely do something. Harold stood up and walked to his phone. My nephew is a lawyer. He specializes in property law. I have not talked to him in a few months, but I think it is time for a family reunion. He dialed the number and waited. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Then a voice on the other end said, Uncle Harold, is everything okay? No, James, Harold said. Everything is not okay, but I think you can help me fix it. How soon can you get here? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then James said, I can be there tomorrow morning. What is going on? Harold looked at Maria, who was watching him with hope shining in her tired eyes. He looked at Diego, who was still building his tower, 1 block at a time. I will explain everything when you get here, Harold said. But bring your briefcase. We have a fight on our hands. After he hung up, Harold felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt alive. He felt like he had a reason to get up in the morning again. But the feeling did not last long, because later that afternoon, when Maria had gone home and Harold was sitting on his porch watching the sunset, a car pulled up to his property. It was not Victoria's car. This one was black and expensive looking, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see who was inside. The car sat there for a long moment, engine running, like a predator watching its prey. Harold stood up from his chair, his heart beating a little faster than he would have liked. Then the window rolled down, and a man's face appeared. He was younger than Victoria, maybe 40 or 45, with slicked back hair, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Jenkins," the man said. "My name is Richard Blackwell. I am Victoria's husband. And I am also the lawyer for Riverside Estates. I think we need to have a conversation." Harold said nothing. He just waited. Richard's smile widened, but it still did not reach his eyes. "You see, Mr. Jenkins, my wife can be a bit enthusiastic sometimes. She gets passionate about our community, and occasionally that passion leads her to make decisions that are not entirely appropriate, like trespassing on my property and destroying my wife's memorial vine," Harold said. Richard's smile flickered for just a second. "Yes, well, that was unfortunate, and I want you to know that the HOA is prepared to make things right. We are willing to offer you a very generous settlement in exchange for dropping any complaints and agreeing to a few simple terms." "What kind of terms?" Richard reached into his car and pulled out a folder. He held it out toward Harold. "It is all in here. We are offering you $50,000 to sell your property to the HOA. That is well above market value, Mr. Jenkins. You could buy a nice little condo somewhere, live out your retirement in comfort. No more maintenance, no more worrying about an old house and an old vineyard. Just peace and quiet." Harold looked at the folder but did not take it. "And if I say no?" Richard's smile disappeared entirely. His face became hard and cold, like a mask made of stone. "Then things will get very difficult for you, Mr. Jenkins. Very difficult indeed. You are an old man living alone. Things can happen to old men living alone. Accidents, misunderstandings, problems with the county, problems with the state. My wife and I have a lot of connections. It would be a shame if those connections were used to make your life uncomfortable." Harold felt fear then. Real fear. Crawling up his spine like a cold hand. This was not just a pushy HOA president anymore. This was something darker. Something dangerous. But Harold had faced dangerous things before. He had survived a war. He had survived losing the love of his life. He had survived 72 years on this earth. And he was not about to be scared off by a man in a fancy car with a fake smile. "Get off my property," Harold said, his voice steady despite the fear. "And tell your wife that I do not scare easy. You want a fight? You have got one." Richard stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound that had no joy in it. "Have it your way, old man," he said. "But remember, I gave you a chance. What happens next is on your head." The window rolled up, and the car drove away, leaving Harold standing alone on his porch as the last light of day faded from the sky. He stood there for a long time, thinking about Margaret, thinking about Maria and little Diego, thinking about all the people in Riverside Estates who were living in fear. He had started something today, something that could not be stopped now, even if he wanted to. And the truth was, he did not want to stop it, but he also knew that he needed help. More help than Maria could provide. More help than even his nephew James could provide. He needed an army, and he had no idea where he was going to find one. That night, Harold barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rustle through his vineyard. Somewhere out there, Victoria and Richard Blackwell were planning their next move. Somewhere out there, Maria was probably lying awake too, wondering if she had made a mistake by coming to him. And somewhere out there, in the houses of Riverside Estates, other people were sleeping uneasily, dreaming of letters and fines and the constant fear of never being good enough. Harold made a decision then. In the quiet darkness of his bedroom, he would find those people. He would bring them together. He would give them something they had not had in a long time. He would give them hope. But first, he had to survive whatever Victoria and Richard were planning. And something told him that the $50,000 offer was just the beginning. Something much worse was coming. He just did not know what it was yet. The next morning, Harold woke up early, even earlier than usual. He made his coffee and walked out to his porch to watch the sunrise, just like he did every day. But this morning, something was different. This morning, there was a sign planted in his front yard. A big sign, bright red with white letters. Harold walked closer, his coffee cup shaking slightly in his hand, and read the words that were printed on it. "Condemned, by order of the county health department, do not enter." Harold stared at the sign for a long moment, his mind struggling to understand what he was seeing. Then he heard cars pulling up, multiple cars. He turned and saw 3 county vehicles parking along the road, and people in official-looking uniforms getting out and walking toward his property. And standing behind them, watching with a satisfied smile on her perfectly painted lips, was Victoria Blackwell. Harold felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He gripped his coffee cup so hard he thought it might shatter in his hand. This could not be happening. This could not be real. But it was real. The county workers were real. The condemned sign was real. And Victoria's smile, that horrible, triumphant smile, was the most real thing of all. A man in a gray uniform approached Harold, holding a clipboard that seemed to be the official weapon of choice for people who wanted to ruin your life. He had a thick mustache and tired eyes, like someone who had done this job too many times and had stopped caring about the people he hurt. "Are you Harold Jenkins?" the man asked. "I am," Harold said, his voice coming out steadier than he expected. "I am Officer Martinez from the county health department. We received a complaint about this property yesterday afternoon. Multiple violations were reported, including unsafe structures, potential contamination of the water supply, and possible pesticide misuse. I have been authorized to conduct an immediate inspection. Harold shook his head slowly. There are no unsafe structures here. I built this house myself, and it has been standing for 47 years. My water comes from the county supply, same as everyone else, and I have never used pesticides on my vineyard. Not once. I grow everything naturally. Officer Martinez looked down at his clipboard. That may be, sir. But we are required to investigate all complaints. The condemned sign is a precautionary measure until our inspection is complete. A precautionary measure? Harold's voice rose despite his best efforts to stay calm. You have put a condemned sign on my property before you have even looked around. How is that precautionary? That is guilty until proven innocent. Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, Harold thought he saw something like sympathy in the man's tired eyes. I understand your frustration, sir. But we have procedures we have to follow. If everything is in order, the sign will come down, and you will receive a letter clearing your property. It should only take a few days. A few days? Harold laughed, but there was no humor in it. And in the meantime, everyone who drives by will think my home is condemned. Everyone will think I am living in some kind of health hazard. Is that fair to you? Before Officer Martinez could answer, Victoria stepped forward. She was wearing another blue blazer today. This one with gold buttons that caught the morning sun. Her clipboard was tucked under her arm like a shield. Mr. Jenkins, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. I know this must be difficult for you, but the safety of our community has to come first. When my husband and I heard about the potential contamination on your property, we felt we had no choice but to report it to the proper authorities. Harold stared at her. There is no contamination. You know that as well as I do. Victoria's smile never wavered. I am sure the inspection will prove that, and if it does, I will be the first to apologize for the inconvenience. But until then, we all have to follow the rules. Even you, Mr. Jenkins. She said those last words with a special emphasis, like she was talking to a child who had misbehaved. Harold felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. You did this, he said quietly. You made a false report to the county. That is a crime, Mrs. Blackwell. Victoria's eyes went cold, even though her smile stayed in place. I simply reported my concerns as a responsible citizen. What the county chooses to do with that information is entirely up to them. She turned to Officer Martinez. Please proceed with your inspection. I want to make sure every inch of this property is thoroughly examined. For everyone's safety, of course. Officer Martinez nodded and waved his team forward. They spread out across Harold's property, poking and prodding, taking pictures, writing notes. One of them headed toward the vineyard, and Harold felt his heart seize in his chest. Be careful with those vines, he called out. They are delicate. The worker glanced back at him but did not respond. Harold watched helplessly as strangers trampled through his vineyard, through the rows he had tended for 20 years, through the place where Margaret's memory lived. Victoria watched too, her arms crossed over her chest, her smile growing wider with every passing minute. She was enjoying this. She was actually enjoying watching an old man's life be torn apart. Harold turned away from her. He could not look at her face anymore without wanting to do something he would regret. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called his nephew. James answered on the second ring. Uncle Harold? I am just getting on the road. I should be there in about 3 hours. Make it 2 if you can, Harold said, his voice tight. The county is here. They have put a condemned sign on my property based on a false complaint. I need you here as soon as possible. There was a pause on the other end. Then James said, Do not say anything else to anyone. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. I am on my way. Harold hung up and put his phone back in his pocket. He felt a little better knowing that help was coming. But 3 hours, or even 2, was a long time to watch your life be picked apart by strangers. He walked back to his porch and sat down in his old rocking chair. He would wait. He would watch. And he would remember every single thing that happened today. Because when this was over, someone was going to pay for what they had done. The inspection took almost 3 hours. The county workers went through every inch of Harold's property, from the house to the vineyard to the old tool shed in the back. They tested his water. They tested his soil. They poked around in corners that had not seen sunlight in years. Through it all, Harold sat on his porch and watched. Victoria stood by her car, talking on her phone, occasionally glancing over with that satisfied smile still plastered on her face. A few cars drove by on the road, slowing down to look at the condemned sign. Harold recognized some of the drivers as residents of Riverside Estates. They stared at his property with curious, judgmental eyes. By tonight, everyone in the neighborhood would know that Harold Jenkins had been condemned by the county. The rumor mill would turn, and by tomorrow, the story would have grown into something even worse. That was what Victoria wanted, Harold realized. Even if the inspection found nothing wrong, the damage was already done. His reputation was already stained. Just before noon, a blue pickup truck came speeding down the road and pulled into Harold's driveway. James jumped out almost before the truck had stopped moving. He was a tall man in his 40s, with the same strong jaw and kind eyes that Harold's brother had possessed. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive, and he was carrying a briefcase that looked even more expensive. Uncle Harold, James said, rushing up to the porch. Are you okay? I am fine, Harold said. though it was not entirely true. Just angry. James looked around at the county workers, at the condemned sign, at Victoria standing by her car. His jaw tightened. "Who is in charge here?" he called out. Officer Martinez walked over, his clipboard still in hand. "I am. And you are?" "James Crawford. I am Mr. Jenkins' attorney. I would like to see the complaint that initiated this inspection, as well as any documentation authorizing the condemned designation." Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable. The complaint was filed anonymously, and the condemned sign was placed as a precautionary measure pending the results of our inspection. James's eyes narrowed. "An anonymous complaint? And you placed a condemned sign on private property based on an anonymous complaint, without any evidence of actual violations? We received information about potential health hazards. We are required to investigate all such reports." "Required to investigate, yes. Required to publicly condemn a man's property before any investigation has been completed? No. That is not procedure. That is harassment." James opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "I have here a copy of county regulations regarding health inspections. Section 4.2.1 clearly states that condemned designations may only be placed on properties after a violation has been confirmed, not before. What you have done here today is not only improper, it may be illegal." Officer Martinez's face went pale. He looked at the papers, then at James, then at Victoria, who had stopped smiling and was now watching, with a worried expression. "I was told this was an emergency situation," Officer Martinez said. "I was told there was imminent danger to the community." "Told by whom?" James asked. Officer Martinez hesitated. Then he pointed at Victoria. "Mrs. Blackwell called the county office yesterday afternoon. She spoke to my supervisor directly. She said she had evidence of serious contamination on this property. She said it needed to be addressed immediately." James turned to look at Victoria. His expression was calm, but Harold could see the anger burning behind his eyes. "Mrs. Blackwell," James said, "would you like to share this evidence with us? I am very curious to see what information you provided to the county that justified this emergency response." Victoria's face had gone from confident to concerned, to something approaching fear. But she recovered quickly, putting on her professional mask once again. "I simply reported what I observed," she said. "I saw Mr. Jenkins spraying something on his vines yesterday morning. I was concerned it might be a harmful pesticide." "Yesterday morning," James repeated. "You mean when you were trespassing on his property? When you cut his wife's memorial vine and stole his personal belongings?" Victoria's mask cracked. Just a little, but enough for Harold to see the panic underneath. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said. "I was never on his property." James smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. "Interesting. Because my uncle has video evidence that says otherwise. Video of you walking through his vineyard, cutting his plants, and taking items that belong to him. Video that clearly shows your face and records your voice admitting that you are the president of the Riverside Estates HOA. He pulled out his phone and held it up. "Would you like me to play it for Officer Martinez? I think he would find it very educational." Victoria's face went white. Actually white. Like all the blood had drained out of it at once. "That video was taken without my consent," she said quickly. "It is not admissible. This is not a courtroom, Mrs. Blackwell. This is a county health inspection. And I think Officer Martinez deserves to know the full context of the complaint that brought him here today." James pressed play on the video. The sound of birds chirping filled the air, followed by the crunch of Victoria's high heels on the dirt between the vine rows. Her voice came through clearly as she talked to herself, listing violations and snapping pictures. Then came the sound of the garden shears, the horrible snipping sound as she cut through Harold's vine. Through Margaret's vine, Officer Martinez watched with growing horror on his face. When the video ended, he turned to look at Victoria with an expression that had completely changed. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said slowly, "did you file a complaint against Mr. Jenkins after trespassing on his property and vandalizing it?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Because if you did," Officer Martinez continued, "that would be filing a false report. That is a criminal offense. I would be required to report it to the police." Victoria found her voice. "This is ridiculous. I am a respected member of this community. I am the president of the HOA. You cannot seriously be taking the word of this video over mine." "The video does not lie," James said. "But it seems like you do, Mrs. Blackwell. Frequently." Victoria's face twisted with fury. The polished, professional mask was gone now, replaced by something ugly and desperate. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she hissed. "My husband is the most powerful lawyer in this county. We have connections everywhere. We will bury you both." Harold stood up from his rocking chair. He had been silent throughout this whole exchange, watching and listening. But now he felt it was time to speak. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I have lived on this earth for 72 years. I have seen bullies come and go. I have seen people who thought they were powerful learn the hard way that power built on fear does not last." He walked down from his porch and stood face to face with Victoria, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. "You cut my wife's vine," he said. "You destroyed the last living thing I planted with her. You did it because you wanted my land, and you thought you could scare an old man into giving it up." He shook his head slowly. But I am not scared of you, Mrs. Blackwell. I am not scared of your husband. And I am not scared of your connections. Because I have something you do not have. And what is that? Victoria spat. Harold smiled. The truth. And people who are willing to stand with me. As if on cue, a car pulled up to the property. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, there were a dozen cars parked along the road, and people were getting out and walking toward Harold's vineyard. Harold recognized some of them. There was Maria, holding Diego's hand. There was an elderly Asian woman who must be Mrs. Chen. There were young couples and old couples, families with children and people who lived alone. They were all residents of Riverside Estates, and they were all holding something in their hands. Papers, stacks and stacks of papers. Maria reached Harold first. She was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since he had met her. We spent all night going through our files, she said. Every letter, every fine, every threat we ever received from the HOA. It is all here. Everything Victoria has done to us for the past 15 years. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. She was a small woman, probably in her 70s, with silver hair and fierce eyes. I have been keeping records since the beginning, she said. Every violation notice, every unfair fine, every lie they told. I always knew this day would come. I just needed someone brave enough to stand up first. She looked at Harold with respect shining in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Thank you for being that person. More people came forward, adding their papers to the growing pile. Some of them were crying. Some of them were laughing. All of them looked like people who had been carrying heavy weights for a very long time and were finally setting them down. Victoria watched all of this with growing terror on her face. Her perfect world was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Officer Martinez stepped forward. Mrs. Blackwell, I think you should leave now. I will be filing a report with my supervisor about what happened here today. I strongly suggest you get a lawyer. My husband is a lawyer, Victoria said automatically. Then get a different one, Officer Martinez replied. Because based on what I have seen, you are both going to need all the help you can get. Victoria stood frozen for a moment, looking at the crowd of people she had terrorized for so many years, looking at the stack of evidence that proved everything she had done, looking at the old man who had refused to be bullied. Then she turned and walked to her car, her high heels catching on the dirt, her blue blazer wrinkled and stained. She got in, slammed the door, and drove away without looking back. A cheer went up from the crowd. People were hugging each other, crying, laughing. Diego broke away from his mother and ran up to Harold, throwing his little arms around the old man's legs. You did it, Diego said. You made the bad lady go away. Harold knelt down, his knees protesting, and looked into the little boy's eyes. We did it, he said. All of us together. That is how you beat bullies, Diego. Not by fighting alone, but by standing together. Diego nodded seriously. Then he smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. Harold stood up and looked at the crowd of people gathered on his property. These were not strangers anymore. These were neighbors. These were friends. These were people who had been waiting for someone to give them hope, and who had found the courage to fight when that hope finally arrived. James came up beside him. This is just the beginning, Uncle Harold. We have a lot of work to do. Filing complaints, organizing the community, maybe even taking the whole HOA to court. It will not be easy. Harold nodded. I know, but look at them, James. Look at their faces. They are not scared anymore. That is worth any amount of work. He turned back to face his vineyard, where the morning sun was casting long shadows between the rows. The vines were still there, still growing, still reaching toward the light. All except one. Harold walked through the crowd, accepting handshakes and hugs as he went. He made his way to the center of the vineyard, to the spot where Margaret's vine used to stand. The stump was still there, cut clean about 6 inches from the ground. Harold knelt down beside it, not caring about his knees, not caring about the dirt. We won today, Margaret, he whispered. I wish you could have seen it. He reached out and touched the cut edge of the stump, just like he had done the day before. But this time, something caught his eye. Something green. He leaned closer, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. A tiny shoot was growing from the side of the stump, just a small green sprout, barely an inch long. But it was there. It was alive. The vine was coming back. Harold felt tears streaming down his face. And he did not try to stop them. He just knelt there in the dirt, watching that tiny green shoot reach toward the sun. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for staying with me. He did not know if he was talking to the vine or to Margaret or to something bigger than both of them. Maybe it did not matter. Maybe the important thing was just to be grateful. Behind him, he could hear the crowd still celebrating, still laughing, still discovering what it felt like to be free. In front of him, a new life was beginning, growing out of something that had been cut down and left for dead. This was not the end, Harold knew. Victoria would fight back. Her husband would use every trick in the book. There would be more battles ahead, more challenges, more moments when giving up seemed like the easiest choice. But right now, in this moment, with the sun warm on his back and a tiny green shoot pushing up from the earth, Harold felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt hope, and then his phone rang. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a number he did not recognize. He answered anyway. Hello? Mr. Jenkins. The voice on the other end was deep and cold. It was Richard Blackwell. "I hope you enjoyed your little victory today. But I want you to know something. What my wife did was child's play compared to what I am capable of." Harold's blood went cold. "I am going to destroy you," Richard continued. "Not just your property. You. I am going to take everything you have, everyone you love, and everything you have built, and when I am done, you will wish you had taken my offer, when you had the chance." The line went dead. Harold stood there, his phone still pressed to his ear, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, the celebration continued. In front of him, the tiny green shoot swayed gently in the breeze. He had won a battle today, but the war was just beginning, and Richard Blackwell was about to show him exactly what he was up against. Harold did not tell anyone about the phone call. Not James, not Maria, not any of the neighbors who were still celebrating on his property. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and painted a smile on his face, shaking hands and accepting hugs like nothing had happened. But inside, his mind was racing. Richard Blackwell was not like his wife. Victoria was a bully, but she was a bully who hid behind rules and paperwork. Richard was something else entirely. Harold had seen it in his eyes that evening when he pulled up in his black car. Richard was the kind of man who did not care about rules, the kind of man who would do whatever it took to win. The celebration lasted until late afternoon. People shared stories about the things Victoria had done to them over the years. They laughed about the ridiculous fines and the silly rules. They cried about the fear they had lived with for so long, and they made plans. Plans to reform the HOA, plans to hold new elections, plans to build a community that was based on kindness instead of fear. Harold listened to all of it, nodding in the right places, saying the right things. But part of him was somewhere else, thinking about Richard's voice, cold and certain, promising destruction. When the last car finally drove away, Harold was left alone with James. They sat on the porch as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You did something amazing today, Uncle Harold," James said. "I have never seen anything like it. Those people worship you." "They do not worship me," Harold said quietly. "They just needed someone to show them they could fight back. Anyone could have done it, but anyone did not do it. You did." James leaned back in his chair and looked at his uncle with serious eyes. "What is wrong? You should be happy right now, but you look like you are carrying the weight of the world." Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and played the voicemail Richard had left. He had not answered the second time Richard called, but the message was there, recorded for posterity. James listened with a face that grew darker with every word. When it ended, he let out a long, slow breath. "That is a threat," he said. "A clear, documented threat. We can take this to the police." "And what will they do?" Harold asked. He did not say anything specific. He did not say he was going to hurt me physically. He just said he was going to destroy me. A good lawyer could argue that he was just speaking figuratively. "I am a good lawyer," James said. "And I am telling you, this is serious. Richard Blackwell is not someone to take lightly. I did some research on him on my way here. He has connections everywhere. Judges, politicians, business leaders. He has gotten people out of serious trouble, and he has put people into serious trouble. The man is dangerous." Harold nodded slowly. "I know. I saw it in his eyes. Then why did you not tell anyone? Why did you let the celebration go on like nothing happened?" Harold looked out at his vineyard, where the last rays of sunlight were turning the leaves to gold. "Because those people needed today. They needed to feel like they had won something. They needed to remember what it felt like to be free, even if it was just for a few hours." He turned back to James. "I have lived a long life, son. I have loved, and I have lost. I have seen good times and bad times. And if there is one thing I have learned, it is that you have to celebrate the victories when they come, because you never know when the next battle will start." James was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Okay, I understand. But tomorrow, we need to prepare. If Richard is coming after you, we need to be ready." "We will be," Harold said. "But right now, I am tired. I am going to bed." He stood up, his old bones creaking and popping. James stood up too and wrapped his uncle in a tight hug. "I am proud of you," James said. "Mom and Dad would be proud too. And Aunt Margaret, she would be the proudest of all." Harold felt tears prick at his eyes. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know." He went inside and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. He lay down on the bed he had shared with Margaret for 40 years, and closed his eyes. Sleep came quickly, but it was not peaceful. He dreamed of dark cars and cold voices, of vines being cut and houses burning. He dreamed of Margaret, standing in the middle of the vineyard, reaching out to him with a sad smile on her face. "Be brave," she said in the dream. "Remember who you are." Harold woke up with a start. Sunlight was streaming through his window, and birds were singing outside. For a moment, he forgot about Richard Blackwell, and the threats, and the fear. For a moment, he was just an old man waking up to a beautiful morning. Then he heard the sirens. He jumped out of bed faster than he had moved in years and ran to the window. Outside, he could see fire trucks racing down the road toward Riverside Estates. Black smoke was rising in the distance, thick and ugly against the blue sky. Harold threw on his clothes and ran outside. James was already on the porch, his phone pressed to his ear, his face pale. "It is Maria's house," James said. "It is on fire." Harold did not wait to hear more. He started running toward the smoke, his old legs carrying him faster than they had in decades. He could hear James behind him, calling for him to wait. But he did not slow down. By the time he reached Maria's street, a crowd had already gathered. Fire trucks were everywhere, their hoses spraying water onto a house that was almost completely engulfed in flames. The heat was intense, pushing everyone back, making it hard to breathe. Harold pushed through the crowd, searching desperately for Maria and Diego. He found them standing on the sidewalk across the street, wrapped in blankets, their faces streaked with tears and soot. "Maria," Harold gasped, reaching them. "Are you okay? Is Diego okay?" Maria nodded, but her eyes were empty, staring at the house that had been her home. "We got out. We smelled the smoke, and we got out. But everything else. Everything is gone." Diego was clinging to his mother's leg, his face buried in her blanket. He was shaking, and Harold could hear him crying softly. "What happened?" Harold asked. "How did it start?" Maria shook her head. "I do not know. I woke up and the living room was on fire. It spread so fast. Too fast." Harold felt his blood turn to ice. Too fast. Fires did not spread that fast on their own. Not unless they had help. He looked around the crowd and saw Mrs. Chen pushing her way toward them. The elderly woman's face was grim. "I saw something, Mrs. Chen said quietly, pulling Harold aside. "Last night, around 2 in the morning. I could not sleep. So I was looking out my window. I saw a car drive slowly down the street. A black car with tinted windows. It stopped in front of Maria's house for a few minutes, then drove away." Harold's hands clenched into fists. "A black car with tinted windows. Richard Blackwell's car. Did you see who was driving?" he asked. Mrs. Chen shook her head. "The windows were too dark. But I wrote down the license plate number. I always write down license plate numbers. You never know when they might be useful." She pressed a piece of paper into Harold's hand. Harold looked at it, memorizing the numbers and letters. "Thank you," he said. "This might be very important." James arrived, out of breath from running. He took one look at the burning house and the crying family, and his face went hard with anger. "This was not an accident," he said. "It was not a question." "No," Harold agreed. "This was a message. Richard Blackwell is telling us what happens to people who stand with me." Maria heard them and looked up. Her empty eyes suddenly filled with fire. "He did this?" she said. "That man did this to my home? To my son?" Harold nodded slowly. "I think so. But I am going to prove it. And when I do, he is going to pay for what he has done." Maria stood up straighter, her blanket falling from her shoulders. "Then I am going to help you. He took my home, but he did not take my courage. He did not take my son, and he is not going to get away with this." Diego looked up at his mother, then at Harold. His little face was still wet with tears, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like determination. "I want to help too," he said in his small voice. "I want to stop the bad people." Harold knelt down in front of the little boy. "You are very brave, Diego, just like your mama. And yes, you can help. Everyone can help. That is how we are going to win." Over the next few hours, the fire was put out, and the investigators arrived. They poked through the ashes, taking samples and photographs. Harold watched them work, hoping they would find something that pointed to Richard Blackwell. James was on the phone constantly, talking to contacts, gathering information, building a case. Mrs. Chen had organized the neighbors, setting up a fund to help Maria and Diego. People were donating money, clothes, toys, anything they could spare. By afternoon, Maria and Diego were settled in Mrs. Chen's guest room. The little boy had finally stopped shaking, comforted by a stuffed bear that one of the neighborhood children had given him. Harold sat in Mrs. Chen's living room, surrounded by the people who had become his army. Maria was there, her face still smudged with soot but her eyes burning with determination. Mrs. Chen was there, her silver hair pinned back neatly, her hands folded in her lap. James was there, his briefcase open on the coffee table, papers spread everywhere, and there were others too. A young man named David, who worked in IT, and had skills with computers. An older woman named Patricia, who used to be a reporter before she retired. A middle-aged man named Frank, who had served in the military and knew how to organize people. They were all there because they believed in something. They believed that good could triumph over evil. They believed that ordinary people could stand up to powerful bullies. They believed in Harold Jenkins, and what he represented. "Here is what we know," James said, pointing to a chart he had drawn on a large piece of paper. "Richard Blackwell is the lawyer for Riverside Estates HOA. He has connections throughout the county government, including the police department, the fire department, and several judges. He has been involved in at least 3 cases where his opponents suffered mysterious accidents or setbacks before their cases could go to trial. So he has done this before," Maria said. "It appears so, but no one has ever been able to prove anything. The man is careful. He covers his tracks." David leaned forward. "What about the license plate number Mrs. Chen gave us? Can we trace it?" James nodded. "I already did. The car is registered to a company called Blackwell Holdings. It is a shell company that Richard owns. He uses it to keep certain assets separate from his personal name, So we know it was his car, Patricia said. That is something. It is something, but it is not enough. We need to prove that someone from his organization was actually at Maria's house last night. And we need to prove that they started the fire. Harold, who had been quiet throughout this discussion, finally spoke up. What about cameras? Does anyone on Maria's street have security cameras? There was a moment of silence. Then Frank raised his hand. I do, he said. I installed them after Victoria fined me for having my trash cans out too long. I wanted to have evidence if she tried to claim I was violating any more rules. Do your cameras cover Maria's house? James asked. Frank thought for a moment. Not directly, but they cover the street in front of my house. If a car drove past, they would have recorded it. James stood up so fast his chair nearly fell over. Can we look at the footage right now? Sure. My system stores everything in the cloud. I can pull it up on my phone. Everyone gathered around Frank as he opened an app on his phone and navigated to the recordings from the previous night. He scrolled to 2 in the morning and hit play. For a few minutes, there was nothing but an empty street, lit by the dim glow of streetlights. Then a car appeared. A black car with tinted windows. It drove slowly, almost creeping, down the street. That is it, Mrs. Chen said. That is the car I saw. The car stopped in front of Maria's house. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a figure got out. The figure was wearing dark clothes and a hat pulled low over their face. They moved quickly to the side of Maria's house and disappeared from view. A few minutes later, the figure reappeared and got back in the car. The car drove away, just as slowly as it had arrived. We have him, James said, his voice tight with excitement. We have video evidence of someone from Richard's car going to Maria's house just before the fire started, but we cannot see the person's face, Patricia pointed out. How do we prove it was connected to Richard? David was already tapping on his phone. I can enhance the video. It will take some time, but I might be able to get a clearer image of the person's face. And even if I cannot, there might be other identifying features, the way they walk, what they are wearing, anything. Do it, Harold said. Whatever it takes. As David got to work, Harold walked to the window and looked out at the street. Somewhere out there, Richard Blackwell was probably sitting in his fancy office, thinking he had won, thinking he had scared everyone into submission. He was wrong. Harold thought about Margaret, about her kindness and her courage. He thought about all the times she had told him that love was stronger than hate, that light was stronger than darkness. He had not always believed her. Sometimes the world seemed so full of cruelty and selfishness that it was hard to believe good could ever win. But today, standing in this room full of ordinary people who had chosen to fight back, Harold believed they were going to bring Richard Blackwell down, not with violence or threats, but with truth and courage and the power of people standing together. It took David 3 days to enhance the video, 3 days of anxious waiting, of looking over shoulders, of jumping at every unexpected sound. Richard made no more moves during that time, probably confident that his message had been received and understood. But on the morning of the 4th day, David called everyone back to Mrs. Chen's house. His face was glowing with triumph. I got it, he said. I got a clear image of the person's face. He turned his laptop around so everyone could see. On the screen was a frozen frame from the security video, enhanced and sharpened until the figure's face was clearly visible. It was not Richard Blackwell. It was someone else. A younger man with sharp features and cold eyes. I ran the image through a facial recognition database, David said. His name is Marcus Webb. He has a criminal record for arson and assault. And guess who his lawyer was for both of those cases? Richard Blackwell, James said. Exactly. Richard got him off both times on technicalities. It looks like Marcus has been returning the favor ever since. James was already packing his briefcase. This is enough. This is more than enough. I am taking this to the state attorney general's office. Richard has too many connections in this county for us to trust the local authorities, but the state level is different. They have been looking for a way to investigate corruption in this area for years. This might be exactly what they need. Harold nodded. Do it. End this. James left immediately, driving toward the state capitol with his briefcase full of evidence. The rest of them waited, hoping and praying that this time, justice would prevail. 2 weeks later, it did. State investigators raided Richard Blackwell's office and home. They found records of payments to Marcus Webb. They found evidence of bribery and corruption going back over a decade. They found proof that Richard had been using his position as HOA lawyer to intimidate and extort money from residents. Richard Blackwell was arrested and charged with racketeering, bribery, arson, and a dozen other crimes. Victoria was arrested too, charged as an accessory, and with filing false reports. Marcus Webb was picked up trying to flee the state, and was charged with arson and assault. The news spread quickly through Riverside Estates. People gathered in the streets, laughing and crying and hugging each other. The nightmare was finally over. Harold watched it all from his porch, sitting in his old rocking chair with a cup of coffee in his hand. Maria and Diego were with him, along with Mrs. Chen and James and all the others who had fought so hard. You did it, Maria said, her eyes shining with tears. You actually did it. Harold shook his head. We did it. All of us together. I could not have done any of this alone. Diego climbed up onto Harold's lap and wrapped his little arms around the old man's neck. "You are a hero," he said. "Like in the movies." Harold laughed and hugged the boy back. "I am not a hero, Diego. I am just a stubborn old man who does not like bullies." "There is a difference." "No," Diego said, seriously. "You are a hero, my hero." Harold felt tears streaming down his face, and he did not try to stop them. Later that day, after everyone had gone home and the sun was setting over the vineyard, Harold walked out to the center of his property. He knelt down beside the stump of Margaret's vine and looked at the tiny green shoot that had grown stronger over the past few weeks. "We won, Margaret," he whispered. "It is really over." He reached out and gently touched the new growth, feeling the life pulsing beneath the delicate green skin. "I learned something these past few weeks, something I think you always knew. It is not enough to just live your own life and mind your own business. Sometimes you have to stand up. Sometimes you have to fight, not for yourself, but for the people who cannot fight for themselves." He sat back on his heels and looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "I also learned that you are never really alone. Even when I thought I was just a lonely old man with a vineyard and some memories, I had more than I knew. I had neighbors who became friends. I had family who came when I needed them. And I had you. I will always have you." He stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees. The vineyard stretched out around him, peaceful and beautiful in the fading light. In a few months, the grapes would be ripe, hanging in perfect little bunches like nature's own jewelry, and Margaret's vine would be growing again, reaching toward the sun, full of life, and hope, and the promise of new beginnings. Harold smiled and walked back toward his house. Tomorrow, there would be more work to do. The HOA needed to be reformed. Maria needed help rebuilding her life. The community needed to heal from years of fear and division. But tonight, Harold was going to sit on his porch and watch the stars come out. He was going to drink his coffee, and remember his wife, and be grateful for all the blessings in his life, because that was what Margaret would have wanted. And Harold Jenkins had learned long ago that Margaret was usually right, about everything. 6 months later, Riverside Estates held its first truly democratic HOA election. The residents voted overwhelmingly for a new board that included Maria Santos as president, Mrs. Chen as vice president, and Harold Jenkins as an honorary advisor, even though his property was still technically not part of the HOA. The new board threw out all of Victoria's ridiculous rules. They lowered the dues. They started a community garden, where everyone could grow vegetables and flowers. They created a fund to help neighbors in need, and they put up a sign at the entrance to the neighborhood that said, "Welcome to Riverside Estates, where neighbors become family." Harold's vineyard became a gathering place for the whole community. People would come to walk among the vines, to sit on his porch and drink lemonade, to listen to his stories about the old days when this was all just fields and trees and the occasional deer wandering through. And in the center of the vineyard, Margaret's vine grew tall and strong. Its leaves turned golden in the fall, and its grapes hung in perfect little bunches, sweeter than any others in the whole vineyard. Harold would walk out there every morning, just like he always had. He would talk to the vine, telling it about his day, about the weather, about the birds he saw, and the dreams he had. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, and the sun was warm on his face, he could swear he heard Margaret laughing.